Welcome back, fellow scientists. So we are going to clean up evolution. Basically, this is everything that we may have touched on or talked about a little bit, but now we're going to go a little bit more in detail. So as I said, I'm going to be using last year's writing and then writing a little bit of extra stuff. Blank notes, if you want to fill them out yourself, are in the blank notes category for this one. That's actually true for this video. It wasn't for the last video. I apologize. I'll get better at this whole online teaching thing by the time it's time to come back to school. So anyways, cleaning up evolution. This is not any specific chapter. Like I said, this is just going through and kind of hitting the high points. So thing number one is that to get life on Earth, first we have to have biological molecules. We have to have organic chemistry, right? So chemical evolution. This is a diagram of the very famous Miller and Urey experiment. So they kind of hypothesized on a prehistoric atmosphere and then put that in there, and then had a little electrodes and made lightning, and then and then they condensed the atmosphere like atmosphere normally does. That's why it rains. It's condensation, precipitation. And so anyway, so then that went into the ocean component, and then that made more atmosphere like it normally does, evaporation, right? So here's kind of the water cycle in miniature, right? And then as this had been going on, then they kind of took some out of the ocean component, like right after it had been hit with the lightning, and they found polymers. They found amino acids and they found nucleotides, which, as we all know, amino acids are the precursors to proteins. They're the building blocks of proteins. Nucleotides are the building blocks of DNA and RNA. So in the content standards in the College Board, right, there are several models. This is what they say. There are several models about the origin of life on Earth. Primitive Earth provided inorganic precursors from which organic molecules could have been synthesized because of the presence of available free energy and the absence of significant quantity of atmospheric oxygen. Oxygen is actually hazardous or poisonous to most life. So that's one possible scenario. Another possible scenario, I don't make this stuff up. This is actually in here in print. Organic molecules could have been transported to Earth by a meteorite or other celestial event. Ugh, don't get me started on that, but that's actually in there. I don't think they're going to have a question on that, but we'll see. And then last but not least, sorry if I'm off camera, chemical experiments have shown that it is possible to form complex organic molecules from inorganic molecules in the absence of life. So that's kind of the Miller-Urey experiment. That's what they're talking about there. Right. So then once we have DNA, RNA, protein, stuff like that, the problem is, okay, so which came first, DNA or proteins? Because as we know, it takes DNA to make proteins, and it takes proteins, DNA polymerase, RNA polymerase, right, to make DNA. So you have the chicken and the egg. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? And the scientist's answer to that is neither. RNA came first. So there are actually some pretty valid experiments that show that RNA has self-splicing and self-replicating capabilities. And so this becomes known as RNA world, right? And in our whole goo to zoo to you kind of condensed idea of the process of evolution, RNA world, that's the goo, that's the prehistoric soup, that's the ooze where everything is kind of happening. So content standards talks about that. The RNA world hypothesis proposes that RNA could have been the earliest genetic material. So there you go. That's great. Endosymbiotic theory, we already talked about this a little bit, right? So how did we get eukaryotes from prokaryotes? A large prokaryote engulfed a small prokaryote. So here we have our large prokaryote. Here we have our small prokaryote. Small prokaryote became mitochondria or chloroplast. We already wrote down some of this evidence, so you guys don't have to write it down, but double membrane, right, because of the engulfing, right? We get a double membrane, size and shape similar to bacteria. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. They have their own unique ribosomes, just like prokaryotes, right? So bacteria have slightly different ribosomes from eukaryotes. And it turns out that mitochondria and chloroplasts actually have those different bacterial ribosomes rather than the eukaryotic ribosomes. Mitochondria and chloroplast, which are, current day bacteria, right? That's what endosymbiotic theory suggests. Make their own proteins. They do have a slightly different genetic code. Bacterial code only has one stop codon, right? If you remember the eukaryotic code, it has 3 stop codons. In the bacterial genetic code, 2 of those stop codons actually code for an amino acid. So the mitochondria and chloroplasts share the genetic code with bacteria, not with the eukaryotes. And then this endosymbiotic theory also addresses how did eukaryotes get all of their other organelles? Well, basically, it's just infoldings of the plasmid membrane. So we have our prokaryote here, and then we have a little infolding right here, and then we have this little gobbledygook right here, which is like membrane, which if, it has the right instructions and does the right stuff, then that's selected for, and it turns into the rough endoplasmic reticulum, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Maybe it like surrounds some DNA or some RNA, right? And then that becomes the nucleus. So anyways, that's that. I know I'm going fast. Feel free to pause. I apologize. So genetic evolution, right? We can talk about macroevolution, we can talk about microevolution, but it all comes back to DNA. It all comes back to genes. It all comes back to allele frequency and different things like that. So evolution is change in allele frequency, and this is where Hardy-Weinberg comes in. I guarantee there will be Hardy-Weinberg questions on the exam at the end of the year, so just kind of get used to that. We could also think of evolution as shifts in Hox gene expression. Remember, Hox genes are these like master control genes that are way up in the flow chart of genes, and they turn on, other genes and other genes and other genes and all the famous genes. So they've done experiments where they've grown embryos in the lab, and then they've stained for different genes and protein products that are being expressed. Um, and so they can see, okay, this certain Hox gene is being expressed here, right? And then along here, they can see that this Hox gene is only expressed here and then kind of here. And then they can see that this Hox gene is only expressed from here, kind of on down. So as they look at that, we can kind of make some really broad generalizations, right? So we have the mouse right here. This is the head. This is the vertebral column, the vertebrae, right? So this is the head, and then this is the tail. So we see that mice have a tail, right, and a kind of a short neck. Chickens, right, they have a little bit longer neck, right, but then they don't really have a tail. Geese have an even longer neck, right, and no tail. And then a python, all it is just a small little head, and then all of their vertebrae are all thoracic vertebrae, which remember, thoracic vertebrae are the ones that have ribs. All right, so it's all thoracic vertebra. So we can kind of see that Hox genes drive shifts in Hox genes expression, drive evolution. Evidence for evolution, simple to complex. Yeah, we already talked about that last video. What we didn't talk about is this idea of punctuated equilibrium, right? So there's two models, right? There's the gradualism model, which is kind of the most famous model, right? But then if this is actually how evolution works, then the thought was we should be finding a lot more transitional forms in the fossil record than we are. All right, so someone came up, I'm not exactly sure who, but someone else came up with this idea of punctuated equilibrium. So equilibrium, things are in balance, things are the same, right? So they're saying that for the history of life on Earth, like most of the time, things are in balance and things are the same. But then, bam, there's like catastrophic, like meteor impact, like global shifts, there's massive changes, right? And bam, that stresses out populations. Different things are selected for, different things are selected against, and then boom, we have all of a sudden, like in a couple thousand years, maybe this new species, right here, and then boom, another change, right, and then we have this new species right here. But for most of the time, it's in equilibrium. It's kind of constant, and we see that in the fossil record. So we do have some transitional forms. I'm not saying that we don't have any, but there's not a lot. There's not as many as this model would lead us to believe. So those are kind of two models of how evolution works. And then thinking about like major catastrophic changes. As we look back in the fossil record, there have been 5 major extinctions in the fossil record, right? And this is due to changes in ocean level and meteorite impacts and different things like that we can see. And then the idea is, and I haven't read this book myself, but it's on my list. I need to go read it. The idea is that humans ourselves are causing the 6th extinction, and which is different, right? Because all the other things were caused by non-human factors or non-animal factors. But now here we have one animal that is kind of dictating the evolution or the course of life on Earth for everything else, right, on Earth. And so it's called the 6th extinction because, like I said, there were 5 extinctions before. So the 6th extinction. recommend that if you need a summer reading book or whatnot. And I think if I go back here, content standards. Yeah, here we go. So a couple things that we need to know, right, about these things. Ecological rates, or sorry, extinction rates can be rapid during times of ecological stress. So that's kind of this punctuated equilibrium model right there. Extinction rates, and then like change, right? Populations under stress, they're gonna change. Different things are going to be selected for, different things are going to be selected against. Human activity can drive changes in ecosystems that can cause extinction. And then extinctions have occurred throughout Earth's history. So those are a couple things to note from the content standards. Little bit of evidence for evolution. So we talked about this in freshman biology. I'm not going to go into it again. Vestigial structures, leftovers from evolution, right? We have our snake spurs, we have our kiwi wings, we have our flightless cormorant wings, we have our manatee toenails, and we have our hip bones and our whales, right? So all of these are useless structures. Why in the world would they be there? Well, they're just kind of leftovers from evolution, and as long as they continue to be non-essential, then they'll be selected against if there's a mutation that happens that removes the toenails from the manatee. Like that's totally fine. The manatee does not need its toenails, right? And then, of course, on a similar note, but totally different as well, we have homologous structures. So the prefix homo means same, right? So homologous structure, so same origin, same basic structure. So we have our penguin flipper and we have our seal flipper, right? Which are both kind of in the water, and this stuff right here, right? It doesn't really match up. And we have our bat wing and our bird wing, which both are in the air, but then these structures down here really match up. But then we have our penguin and our goose, right? And those actually match up, right? Even though this is for swimming and this is for flying. And we have our bat and our seal, and these kind of match up a little bit better, even though this is for flying and this is for swimming, right? And so we can even look further, and we can look at these mammals: humans, cats, whales, and bats, all mammals that all have the same basic structure, but they're used for lots of different things: flying, swimming, walking, and then grasping, right? So why in the world would we have similar structures for such different things? Well, it's because we all share a recent common ancestor. And then speaking of common ancestors and Tiktaalik and, well, I didn't say Tiktaalik yet, but common ancestors and four limbs, on land, stuff like that. There's an interesting documentary. It's 55 minutes long, so you don't have to watch it. I wouldn't show it in class just because it's too long. But it's a documentary called Your Inner Fish. It's by PBS. It's very very well done. The main guy that they focus on is called Neil Shubin, and he found this fossil that he called Tiktaalik. And so this is a fish, but it's a flat-headed fish with eyes on the top of its head, and it has a very, very sturdy front limbs. And so the idea is that this is the missing link from ocean or from water onto land, because all land animals, well, not all land animals, I guess, but mammals at least share this kind of common structure right here that was first found. So this is the common ancestor of all of this stuff, right? So I just kind of spoiled it, but that's okay. Watch the video; it's very well done. All right, so then on that same note, if we think about homologous structures, this is an example of something known as divergent evolution. Right? So divergent evolution says we have one kind of ancestral thing like Tiktaalik up here, right? And then it diverges into a bunch of different things for a bunch of different purposes. So for swimming, for flying, for walking, or for grasping, right? So divergent evolution, we start with one ancestor, and then we have different mutations, and then we get small body size and spots and large body size with a mane, and then different colorations and different things like that. And that idea of divergent evolution is closely tied to another idea called adaptive radiation. So as we learn about ecology in the coming videos, we're going to learn about this thing called a niche. So a niche is kind of the ecological factors that an organism needs to survive. It includes temperature and water level and light level and food and a nesting space if you're a bird or just like all sorts. We'll get into it, but thinking about extinctions, right, or thinking about founder effects. Um, if there are a bunch of niches, right, that suddenly become open because of an extinction or because of a founder event, then there will be populations will go through what's known as an adaptive radiation. So here's our original finch that landed on the Galapagos Islands, right? And then some of the islands, right, had different flowers already there, and so those ecological that food source was open, that ecological niche was there, and so the mutations that favored using those niches were selected for, right? And then on a different island, then there were other environmental factors or other flowers, and so those mutations that favored using those niches, right? Those were selected for. And then here we have the crushing beaks, right? And so there were other environmental factors on other islands, but because these islands were like uninhabited currently by birds, all of those niches were all open. So basically, like all the mutations, whether it was a mutation for a long beak or a short beak, like all the mutations that happened were selected for because there were so much resource or so many things available that this first original finch population just kind of went nuts. It just went through like really rapid, right? Evolutionary. Here we go. Really rapid evolutionary change in a short amount of time. So, like I said, this is kind of cleaning everything up. It's kind of everything that kind of fits together, but then also it's just a fire hose. So I apologize. So, antonym of divergent evolution then is convergent evolution. So, you can read the definition, very different species filling the same niches. So, we have the bat and the bird and the insect, right? All of them fly, but all of them have very different wings. But this would be a classic example of convergent evolution, where, yeah, way, 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 way back, they shared a common ancestor, but insects and birds and mammals have not shared a common ancestor for a very, very long time. However, there are niches that are open that are available, such as the air, right? That there's going to be mutations for, and in different lineages, then those mutations might look a little bit different, but they're all evolving wings of some sort, and so that's called convergent evolution. If vastly different things or animals or plants or whatever kind of adapt or evolve or have mutations to fill the same ecological niche. And then last but not least, yep, this is it. Uh, Good old fill in the blank, right? Just to make sure that we get everything. So decreased genetic diversity equals an increased chance of extinction, right? So if something catastrophic happens and you don't have a lot of genes in your gene pool, in your toolkit, in your genetic toolbox, then Darwin says you die, right? Natural selection acts on phenotypes, right? So big A, little a, right, have the same phenotype. So natural selection is going to act the same on homozygous dominant and heterozygous, right? And then, of course, I can't resist. Populations evolve, not individuals. So the whole population, the gene pool evolves, right? There are certain processes like glycolysis. There are certain molecules like DNA. There are other processes like the central dogma, right? So DNA to RNA to proteins, which make you, right? That we all share because of a common ancestor, right? Or some people would argue common designer, possibly, but you'll see common ancestor on the AP test. Farming is another human activity that can cause extinctions that decreases genetic diversity, right? We're going to take this vast open field, forest with lots of different animals and lots of different plants, and we're going to cut everything down and we're going to turn up the soil and we're going to plant corn because it's delicious. And it's true, it is delicious, but it decreases genetic diversity nonetheless. So humans have an impact on evolution. And then last but not least, humans have impacted evolution by artificial selection and antibiotic resistance. So artificial selection, we're intentionally breeding for traits, as in like wheat and the mustard, the broccoli, the cauliflower, the different things like that. Dogs, right? Artificial. But then humans have also inadvertently caused antibiotic resistance because anytime we're sick, we take antibiotics, and then that selects against those bacteria that are killed by the antibiotics, but then it selects for the bacteria that are not killed by the antibiotics. So in trying to make ourselves better, right, short term that works, but then long term we're just growing populations of bacteria within us that are resistant to these antibiotics that we have at our disposal. So it's an evolutionary arms race. Are we going to win? Is the bacteria going to win? It's to be determined, right? I think Jesus is going to come back soon. I hope he's going to come back soon, and then yeah, and then that'll be it. But in the meantime, before Jesus comes back, if you get a prescription, right, take all of the prescription. Don't just take it until you feel better, because then you're just hastening antibiotic resistance. And if you feel sick, if it's like the cold or the flu or something like that, don't use antibiotics, because that's not going to be effective on a virus, and you're just selecting for those resistant bacteria when you don't even really need to, right? You're just taking a pill because it makes you feel better. So, anyways, don't contribute to antibiotic resistance. This has been Mr. Leo. Hopefully, this has been informative. I will see you on the flip side.